Well, certainly the government wanted you to believe that it was the patriotic thing to do to buy some war bonds, and they certainly promoted them very heavily. And if you couldn't go out and fight, then it was suggested that whatever spare money, wealth you might have, then that would be wise to invest that to help the war effort by putting that money in the war bonds.
Nevertheless, they offered 5% interest, which of course by today's standards sounds very generous. Even then, not bad. Was that because they feared that perhaps being patriotic wasn't quite enough?
That's right. I mean, 5% was a really good rate of return at the time, and it was considerably more than other government securities. And the other important thing really about the war bonds and what made them very attractive was that they were also considered very secure. So for the hesitant investor, the investor who wanted security, the war bonds seemed very attractive to them.
So who was buying them? 120,000 still they have.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there's a sort of popular perception that the war bond holders were generally sort of wealthy middle-class types. But actually, I'm doing some research with the Bank of England at the moment, and what we're beginning to discover from their records of those people who invested is that they came from quite a broad variety of different backgrounds. So there are a good number of shopkeepers, for example, people in small manufacturing trades, people in professional occupations. And another striking thing actually is the number of women who were investing in war bonds, and particularly single women, so widows and spinsters.
What was the sort of lowest chunk of war bond you could buy, the lowest amount?
Well, we know now actually that around a third of those who still hold war bonds have bonds valued at less than £100. So it did go down to relatively low levels, and somewhere in the region of 80% owned bonds worth less than £1,000. So this was really actually small investors.
But that would be at the time when the annual salary was what? It was a...
Well, you're right. I mean, at that time it was worth considerably more. But still, this was something that was within the reach of, I guess, groups that we might describe as a lower middle class.
And what happened then? Because, of course, we're talking over a century ago now. So have they just been passed down generations? Is that how it works?
That's often what happens. So people could, of course, sell their war bonds, but it's clear that actually many were just passed on. So as people died, they mentioned these in their will and they passed them on to their relatives. And I was talking to a friend the other day, and she was saying how in her family there are still some of these war bonds, a small amount, but nevertheless something that's been handed down in that way.
But basically, as I understand it, what the government has done is, it's good accounting practice that they were paying too much interest, effectively.
Sure. So the government has looked at this, and they're still paying a fairly hefty rate of interest at the current time when interest rates are so low. So in spite of the costs of contacting all those bondholders and giving them their money back, it's still worth their while to do this and borrow at a lower rate.